Namaste, good afternoon, and I'm happy to meet you guys after COVID. It's been over 2.5 years, and I'm happy to relaunch the State of the Union addresses. This time, the focus will be entirely on the SME verticals, the economy, the SME verticals. I would be doing a series of caucuses with entrepreneurs here and in the US, 20 in all. It will focus on various critical verticals from healthcare to commodities, eateries, to hotels, and the like. Not to forget mainstream industries like steel and so on and so forth. It's been a careful pick of 20 people who have actually had to go through some tough times. And given that we live in turbulent times, the entire emphasis would be on governance aspects, how they managed, what did they do, where was there any help forthcoming, how did they manage to motivate their human capital, in a sense, how did they survive? The fact is that there are many similarities between the two economies, India and the United States, and therefore uh, much of the points, which come up would be applicable to both the geographies, to both the economies, and that's why I've taken a kind of a wider base of around 20 entrepreneurs, so that we cover a vast gamut of entrepreneurship, of various verticals, and so on and so forth. Now, if you guys may recall, just a year before COVID, maybe a little more than that, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Hisamuddin Papa, a renowned pulmonologist, outstanding medical professional, and a humane doctor, and a very noble personality. And much ahead of COVID, he said, while talking of pulmonology, that prevention is everything, and that primary healthcare centers need to be in place, properly managed, so that the health of the citizenry is given foremost importance. Now, it so happens that the two of the entrepreneurs I have selected, two are his children. One, of course, is Mr. Nizamuddin Papa, who has had forays in medical tourism and eateries, and I would be interviewing him in a few days from now. And right now, I have with me Salman, also known as Dr. Kalimuddin Papa, an emergency physician and somebody who has worked diligently with respect to certain critical aspects of healthcare. A few years ago, he launched an initiative in Chennai called Urgent Care, Huma Urgent Care. And in this episode, he will talk about the trials and tribulations of running Huma Urgent Care, how it came about, what were the issues he handled, what were the lessons he learned, and most importantly, how is he going to tackle the present and face the future with elan. So that's Dr. Kalimuddin Papa, and we shall start right away. So the first question to Dr. Kalimuddin Papa is, why did he even launch an initiative like Urgent Care? Please go ahead, Dr. Papa.
At the outset, I would thank Dr. Kishore Wangal for his very kind words of introduction. And sir, it has always been a pleasure to meet you. The last 2 decades, and even now, it's always a privilege that I'm associated with you for so many years now. So, I am a trained emergency physician. I'm, that's my specialization, and obviously, as any professional would do, I was looking into aspects of where, how emergency or delivery of emergency care can be made better for the common man and in general for the country. Because when it comes to an emergency, I don't think anybody is spared, whether rich or poor. An emergency has to be handled on time and in a very standardized way, failing which there is loss of life. So
Good.
that's how critical it is.
Good. So the fundamental question is that how did you go about implementing it, given that you realize that there is a space in Chennai and other places where this critical need is not being provided astutely. So, given that you realize that this is a kind of space where you should be working both with reference to advancement of technology and with reference to providing better service to the average citizen and being human about it, how did you go about implementing this per se? I mean, in the sense it's from an idea to implementation. How did this happen? I mean, the idea is great, but then to implement this, how did you go about doing it?
So what we realized was we have fabulous institutions in India, very well connected and all of that, but we do always face a challenge when it comes to infrastructure, because transportation and accessibility to such emergency centers, ideally in a tertiary care or secondary care hospital, is very challenging for everybody when there is the need. So we thought that we should come up with a concept where every locality and a community should be equipped with a center which is accessible. So first, criteria was accessibility. If a center is accessible, then the care can be provided. So that was the first thing. And secondly is the standard of care. So in the first round, we opened more than half a dozen, almost a dozen of urgent care centers in the city of Chennai and the peripheries of Chennai. And we were fortunate enough to be well positioned in very reputable institutions, residential complexes, IT parks, schools of international repute. And we had the chance and opportunity to run them and try out the best way possible that we could.
Good. At this junction, just give us a brief history, I mean, in terms of a narrative as to when exactly it started, 2012, 20, or whenever it started, the year, and then just walk us through the various milestones, the various initial challenges you had, staffing, issues to do with nursing, and if at all you had, and stuff like that. So all those issues, if you can talk about the actual startup issues, when did you started the whole initiative, what were the issues, and how did you tackle those initiatives, and then did that mature into better governance within the organization, and what were the lessons you learned in this matter?
So when we first approached institutions, the idea was very welcome, because everybody wanted a service like this, where their own community or complex would have a 24/7 center with all the equipment, medical equipment, to test, to diagnose, and a full-time healthcare provider. The acceptability was there, but the biggest challenge was, in our country, everybody's expectation was to have a doctor present in the center at all times, which obviously has limitations, because doctors would ideally, are associated with the hospital or an institution. So that was a big challenge for us when we started off. Secondly, sustainability of such institutions, such centers, in complexes was a big challenge. So we tried out two options. We worked out a subscription model. We also worked out a walk-in model. And obviously the subscription module helped us to better equip our center, better sustain our center, and maintain all the standards which were necessary, as opposed to a walk-in center, which eventually, over a period of 6 months, or sometimes even 3 or 4 years, we had to unfortunately shut down, because we could not sustain them.
Very good. Now, that's a good point. Now, obviously, this show was managed by you and your wife, Mrs. Alisha. Now, tell us one thing. When you had certain failures, how did you tackle them? I mean, what was the reasoning? I mean, that which went behind, tackling those failures. How did you go in a very progressive way, or were you very kind of, or did you get angry about failures because it was a startup and stuff like that, or did you look at it in a more positive way, and were you trying to self-correct? All those kind of things I'd like to know here. I mean, because this is the key segment, because this is all about entrepreneurship.
Sure.
We're moving away from health to entrepreneurship now. So that is where it is.
So obviously, because it's healthcare, there's no chance of an error, and we faced all kinds of challenges, right? From people coming and bargaining a very meager consultation of 30 rupees to saying that are you substandard in terms of reporting. So all kinds of things we had to face, but the key was not to react, but just to be proactive in the approach. And every little thing, there was not a single question or a problem which was unanswered. We had to tackle them head on. So the idea was not to react, idea was to be proactive in the approach and also deal with the problems head on. Moving away from the issues was not at all an option. It would have failed very badly for us. It would have had a negative repercussion. So we were taking on every single micro level incident as a learning experience. And in the last 7 years to 8 years, having run these centers, we've had a phenomenal learning experience in the process. And now we are trying to come up with something else.
1 minute. Sorry to cut you short, but given that you had 3 albatrosses thus far, one was with the people initially not accepting it the way you wanted them to accept it,
Sure.
even though it meant a lot of good for them. And the second thing was the issue of staffing, train people. I mean, you couldn't get anybody and everybody there, so you had to train people up to a certain standard, paramedics or nurses or whatever, to get them there. And the third issue was that since you had an approach to zilch debt, this was entirely funded from within, so obviously there would have been pressures on the finances. So from these 3 aspects, which is penetrating the market, issues of human capital, and issues of finance. So these 3 aspects, which are the 3 albatrosses, this I think you should actually go into detail in all the 3 aspects, how you actually dealt with the problems and how the problems eventually were sorted out, and what was the biggest takeaway for you from handling these 3 albatrosses. That would be very beneficial to everybody listening, because there could be many startups across verticals who would face a similar situation in their own verticals and stuff like that. And even in healthcare, where there's so many healthcare initiatives coming up, many of them by first generation doctors and stuff like that. So if you can throw light on these 3 aspects, which is to do with penetrating the market, which is to do with the human capital, and which is to do with finances, how you manage the finances, it will be wonderful for everybody.
So we, from this start, from the ab initio, we were really having one core principle which we followed. That was that what we are going to be doing, in terms of the delivery of healthcare, it should benefit the larger portion of society. That was the key principle. And when the core is really strong, the intent is strong, and we're sincere in delivering the same, then there's always acceptability, and we always find a way where we can move ahead and run an institution or an organization that way. So for us, the core principle is that this initiative has to benefit people. That was the intent. And on the other aspect, it was also designed in a way that it supports our own team and staff in a way that we were always, from the day they were interviewed up to their implementation in services, we ensured that they have a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan in terms of their personal lives. So we used to get into the personal lives of our staff, discuss with them whether they're married, unmarried, they have children, they have some challenges or personal things that they were, facing. So we used to, maintain a separate record of these things, and then as and when time goes by, we do have certain challenges in execution. We, would have a separate person sit down to them, counsel them, talk to them, discuss whether is your personal life, getting in the way of delivery of your professionalism there.
In other words, it is a brand of compassionate capitalism where you wanted to treat them as members of the family.
Absolutely.
And went down to their thing. Now,
Absolutely.
the final thing, which is about inclusive growth, how did you kind of share the rewards? How did you tell them the burdens you face with reference to raising money, with reference to handling the situation, and given the limitations and restraints and constraints, how well were you able to share whatever you got in terms of rewards with them, and did they feel good about it, and would you recommend an inclusive model like that for all startups around the world?
Honestly speaking, with our staff, with the entire healthcare providers, the gamut of them that we have, all of them don't react the same way. Some of them don't really know what language you're talking. It could be due to various reasons, their backgrounds, and the geography that we live in, various other things. But some do realize and they stay put with us. Some prefer, because they're all young staff, they like to go for better opportunities, move on to better institutions and things like that. So we had a mix of all kinds of things. But having said that, in the last few years, after dipping ourselves into all of these things, we realize what not to do more than what we need to do. So we've learned a lot of how better we can bring out. We used to incentivize our staff in many ways, even for about 15 minutes of an extra additional duty that they may perform.
Yeah.
And we realized that paying, giving them, because at the end of the day they have their own financial burdens and challenges. So they are ready to work for us over time if you pay them extra. And we realized that sorted out a lot of things. An 8-hour shift, if it moves on to even a 10-hour shift, was beneficial to them and to us. And they stay put with us. It was better for us. We brought in more quality.
Good. But my question was, in terms of inclusive growth, what the best prescription is over a period of time to make the employees as kind of shareholders. Were you progressing on those lines? Were you at one stage contemplating that, or would you contemplate in the future, now that I'm going to talk about the next point of your version 2.0 of the same thing, given all the experiences you had and the lessons you have learned, would you consider inclusive growth in the sense, like, for example, if you have staff now of 8 or 10 years standing who have been outstanding professionals in their own way, who have been very loyal to you, loyal to the organization more than anything else, would you consider making them shareholders, like an employee stock ownership pattern or stuff like that? Because, these things are there only in MNCs and stuff like that. But the critical thing about any economy in the world is that the SMEs are the ones which keep it going. If you have a flourishing SME segment, you have a flourishing economy. That's a simple prescription for any nation. So likewise, at your Humor Urgent Care, would you, envisage such things happening, of providing for inclusive growth, taking care of their families, the education of their children, and so on and so forth? Would that become a part of the paradigm? Of course, given your limitations and all that, as you grow, would that be very much in the horizon? And would you feel that such a strategy would actually make them better performers?
So, from the start of the institution, there's one thing very dear to my wife and I, was housing needs to be sorted out for my staff. So housing and education was two things which was always there, and we thought that as a moral obligation we ought to provide our staff with a secure shelter and also education for their next generation. But with regards to shareholding and stocks, something we have certainly thought of, but not really. We didn't know how to go ahead and implement such a thing. Yeah. Probably with some advisors on this, experts on this.
But you're inclined to do so eventually.
Certainly. I think that's the way to go about it.
Okay, certainly. Wonderful, fantastic. So now we will come to the present and the future. So you had mentioned that you are now in the process of launching a version 2.0 based on the lessons learned and the expertise gained, and the overall vision is now dovetailed towards providing for holistic healthcare to sections of society, starting with schools and stuff like that. Now, if you can elaborate on that on version 2, and you were talking to me about how you're going to do this for at the level of the school first and then scale it up to thing, that would be very, very useful, because a scaling up model is something SMEs would benefit from if they hear from you as to what you are going to do, and they can use the same thing in their own verticals.
Sure. So in the second version now, we want to come out bigger and better in better standard of practices. We are getting in, we're partnering with an American company who's brought in some fabulous technology. They have a few patents to their cap, and this is called Rejuven Corporation. It's based out of America, and they have a global presence as well. So they have a device which is very unique, which collaborates very well with our model of service. So that will bring down the cost phenomenally for the people. It will make and provide extreme convenience for the patients and for us as a healthcare provider with a very advanced level of EHR system.
Very good.
Artificial intelligence.
But you had targeted schools first, and that was from a preventive perspective, right?
That's perfect.
So prevention is better than cure. So we're penetrating the schools first,
yes,
and then scaling up to colleges, institutions, and companies down the line.
Schools will be the first target because that's where the health of the nation is, the youngsters.
Yes.
So we want to bring in the awareness of health from the schools, and the better reach, because once you're into schools, you're also attracting health into the parents as well. So it's a huge target audience there. So
good. So it's a very clearly well laid out plan, and for which I'm sure you have already researched on the backup for the staffing requirements and other things. All of them have been well researched, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So the takeaway for many entrepreneurs in the world, from Dr. Salman Papa, Dr. Kalimuddin Papa, is that no matter what albatrosses you have, and he has clearly had 3 albatrosses. He has had an albatross of penetrating the market, an albatross with human capital, and of finances. And despite those various problems, he has looked at those problems not as adversities but as opportunities for growth, and he has shepherded the company along with his wife to a particular level. And now in version 2.0, they are just going a few notches more to penetrate the market at a very, very high level, so that, and a very select targeted audience, so that the objectives are very clear, in the sense management by objectives. And so there you go, guys. This is the way forward for SMEs going forward in the future, because we are in turbulent times now. Economies around the world are in turbulent times, and self-help is the best help. If you can manage your enterprises astutely, work very hard in retaining the talent you have, provide for compassionate capitalism, allow for urge of inclusive growth, ensure that there's transparency and accountability, and above all, make sure that product and service quality are of the best possible levels. If that are the best possible levels, if that happens, just as Dr. Kalimuddin Papa said, after all the lessons he learned with version 1.0, in version 2.0, he starts off with all those lessons well learned, so that he can implement all the ideation perfectly, and therefore growth per se would become en passant. Thank you so very much, Dr. Kalimuddin Papa.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, guys.
Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you so much. Jai Hind. Until the next time and the next entrepreneur, Jai Hind. Thank you so much.